There is a peculiar violence in the desire to become extraordinary. Most people want to live. Some want to live well, but there are those who become haunted by something else entirely. A refusal so deep it feels less like ambition and more like exile from the ordinary. They do not want money. Money is too small. They do not want comfort. Comfort is a trap. They want significance. They want to leave something behind that time cannot completely erase. And the more they achieve, the further the horizon moves, whispering that whatever has been built is not yet enough, that the real life is still ahead, always ahead, just beyond the next summit. Look at the record. Alexander wept because there were no more worlds to conquer, and died at 32, with an empire that fractured the moment his heart stopped. Napoleon crowned himself in a cathedral, believing he could bend history around his will, and spent his final years on a rock in the Atlantic, writing memoirs to a world that had already moved on. Caesar crossed the Rubicon, knowing the Republic would burn, and the Senate blades found him anyway, beneath a statue of Pompey, as if the very monument were laughing. They did not merely want to win, they wanted to be unforgettable, and unforgettable is a hunger that no banquet can satisfy. Where does this hunger come from? Not from the world. The world rewards moderation. The world praises the contented. The world asks only that you fit, that you function, that you do not disturb the sleep of others. No, this hunger comes from somewhere older. Somewhere beneath the civilized self. A voice that does not speak in words but in fire. A voice that says, "You were not made for this." And so the young man looks up. He sees the conqueror crossing a battlefield alone, his shadow longer than his army, dust in his mouth and the weight of empire in his eyes. He sees the philosopher standing against his age, speaking truths that will not be heard for centuries, knowing he will die without recognition. He sees the artist in a room full of invisible light, starving, painting what nobody else can see, possessed by a vision that looks like madness until 50 years after his death. He sees the ruler bending an empire around the architecture of his will, not because the world asked him to, but because he could not stop. Humanity has always produced these figures, but more importantly, humanity has always worshipped them, built statues, wrote epics, named eras after them. Why? Because something in the great man answers a primitive psychological longing, the desire to become more than yourself, to break the gravitational pull of the average, to stand in a place where the air is thinner and the view is unbearably clear. But perhaps the great man is not merely a historical figure. Perhaps he is an image living inside the human psyche, waiting to be born through whoever is desperate enough to answer his call. Carl Jung understood this. He saw that the psyche does not merely contain memories and thoughts. It contains ancient patterns, images that return across cultures and centuries, wearing different faces but breathing the same air. The hero, the ruler, the sage, the rebel, the creator, the destroyer. Somewhere within this landscape stands the exceptional individual, the one who rises above limitation, who sees further, who refuses the life handed to him, and burns a new path through the forest. But Jung also saw the danger. An archetype can inspire a man. It can also possess him. The difference between being touched by greatness and being consumed by it is thinner than a blade of grass, and most men never learn where the line is until they have already crossed it. The young man looks at greatness. At first he admires it. Then he desires it. Then he identifies with it. He begins building himself around the image with a devotion that looks like discipline, but is often desperation. He wakes at 4 in the morning. He reads while others sleep. He trains his body like a machine and sharpens his intellect into a weapon. The ordinary is not merely avoided, it is despised. His language changes. His ambitions grow teeth. He constructs a mythology around his own becoming, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, he stops being a man who wants to be great and becomes a man playing the role of one. This is the persona, the mask, the hero creating a great man out of a coward. And the persona is useful. It organizes chaos, it commands respect, it builds empires, it gets the applause. But one morning the man looks in the mirror and sees only the armor, and he begins to wonder if there was ever anything beneath it at all. He has everything required to look exceptional. But something inside him remains unsatisfied. A silence at the center. The persona can accumulate achievements, it can collect titles, wealth, admiration, but it cannot answer the question that waits in the dark. Who are you when nobody is watching? When the lights go out, when the applause stops, when the empire is quiet and the phone does not ring, what remains? This is where the desire for greatness becomes psychologically interesting. Maybe the man does not only want greatness, maybe he wants greatness because he is terrified of insignificance. Maybe achievement is not ambition, maybe it is compensation, a frantic architecture built over an abyss he refuses to look into. He does not climb toward heaven, he climbs away from something below. And the higher he builds, the deeper the abyss becomes. But perhaps there is another reason the great man fascinates us. Perhaps beneath the hunger for achievement lies something much older than ambition, death. Ernest Becker argued that human beings possess a peculiar psychological problem. We know we are going to die, yet we are compelled to live as though we will not. We build identities, civilizations, religions, achievements, reputations, and monuments that allow a finite creature to experience itself as participating in something larger and more enduring than its own brief existence. The body cannot negotiate with death. So the human being negotiates with it symbolically. He builds something that can outlive him, a child, a book, a religion, a nation, an empire, a name, and perhaps, at the extreme end of this hunger, the great man emerges. A mortal creature attempting to carve his existence into something time will struggle to erase. Suddenly the obsession with greatness looks different. The monument is no longer merely a monument. It is an argument against oblivion. The man wants to become extraordinary. His body reminds him he is biological. He wants permanence. Time reminds him everything ends. He wants control. Death waits without negotiation. He wants to become larger than life. Life keeps reminding him that he is alive only temporarily, so he builds higher. He gathers more. He leaves marks on the world like scratches on a prison wall, proof that someone was here, that this life meant something, that it will not be swallowed without resistance. This is where the descent begins. Jung once wrote that a tree cannot grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Do not treat this as a quotation. Treat it as biology, as law. Every tree that rises toward the light must first disappear beneath the earth. The visible part, the trunk, the branches, the leaves reaching for the sun, is only half the organism. The other half happens in darkness, in pressure, in silence, in soil that knows no light. And so it is with the human being. The world sees the discipline. Inside, the man experiences doubt so old it has a face. The world sees the confidence. Inside, fear lives in a room he never enters. The world sees the ambition. Inside, hunger that cannot be fed by anything external. The world sees the strength. Inside, the memory of being powerless, of being small, of being nobody. This is where greatness gets its roots, not in the light, not in the applause, but in the confrontation with everything the self would rather not be. This is the shadow. Everything the great persona cannot tolerate gets pushed downward. Weakness, envy, fear, sexuality, aggression, need, failure, inferiority, resentment, and beneath them all, the thing the heroic image cannot tolerate most, finitude, The knowledge that this body will die, that these achievements will be forgotten, that time does not negotiate. The man does not eliminate these things. He buries them. He builds his monument higher, so he does not have to hear them breathing beneath the floorboards. But what is buried does not die. It waits. It grows in the dark. It feeds on silence, and the higher the man builds his image, the deeper his rejected self must descend. Eventually the roots touch something he spent his entire life trying not to see, himself. Then comes the cruel education of failure. Not the small failures that teach lessons, the large ones that strip flesh from bone. The failure that arrives in public and stays in private. The humiliation that removes superiority like a surgeon removes a mask. The loneliness that strips away applause and leaves only echo. The rejection that proves external validation was never his to own. The loss that strips control from his hands and shows him that the world was never bending to his will. He was simply lucky for a while, and now his luck has turned. Greatness is not produced by suffering. Suffering is an encounter. It is the moment when the ground that held his image collapses, and he falls not into greatness, but into himself. The mythology dissolves, the armor cracks, the man stands naked in a way he has not been since childhood. This is the psychological crucible. The question is no longer, can I become great? The question becomes, what remains when the image of greatness has nothing left to feed on? But the descent can fail. Instead of confronting the shadow, the man can become possessed by the archetype. He begins believing he is destined, then chosen, then superior, then exempt. The image grows too large for the human being carrying it, and the man becomes a vessel for something he no longer controls. This is psychological inflation, and now greatness becomes dangerous. Nietzsche understood this obsession. He chased the heights so relentlessly that he mistook the mountain for the man. He believed in the overman, the one who would transcend, who would overcome all that was small and weak and human. He saw the human condition as something to be overcome, not integrated. But he forgot that the one who overcomes must first know what is being overcome. And if what is being overcome is your own mortality, your own finitude, your own helplessness in the face of time, then your greatness is not transcendence, it is escape. And escape always collapses. The desire to rise above humanity turns into contempt for humanity. The man who wanted to stand above the crowd begins believing the crowd exists beneath him. The hero becomes tyrant. The visionary becomes fanatic. The creator becomes destroyer. He speaks in certainties. He mistakes his will for fate. He confuses his hunger for destiny. And the worst part is, he believes he is still becoming himself, when in truth he has become only the mask, shouting commands into an empty throne room. Here is the paradox. The man spends his life trying to become extraordinary, but the deeper he descends, the more human he becomes. He discovers fear not as an obstacle, but as a companion. Weakness not as something to destroy, but as something to carry. Dependency not as failure, but as truth. Contradiction not as confusion, but as the actual texture of existence. Mortality not as an enemy, but as the only measure that gives his life weight. He does not transcend these things, he integrates them. And this produces the revelation. Perhaps greatness does not mean becoming less human. Perhaps it means becoming conscious of more of what it means to be human. Not rising above the crowd, but descending deep enough that you can no longer pretend to be anything other than what you are. Now greatness must be redefined, not being above others, but being large enough to contain your contradictions. Not never being weak, but being able to look at your weakness without letting it rule you. Not destroying the shadow, but bringing what was unconscious into consciousness, so that the darkness no longer makes your decisions for you. Not becoming the archetype, but becoming yourself, the only thing that was ever truly extraordinary about you in the first place. This is individuation, not perfection. Not transcendence, but wholeness, the terrifying, unglamorous, unmarketable wholeness of a person who has touched his own hell and survived to tell the story. Return to the tree. Nobody sees the roots. History records the branches, the achievements, the victories, the monuments, the books, the empires, the speeches, the moments where the man stood above his age and seemed to belong to a different species. But underneath every extraordinary life is an invisible architecture. Years nobody witnessed, failures nobody remembers, private battles fought in rooms with no windows, fear faced at 3 a.m, doubt that did not win, discipline that looked like madness, self-confrontation that felt like dying. Perhaps the height of a man's life is determined by the depth of what he was willing to confront beneath it. The roots do not determine whether you are seen. They determine whether you remain standing when the storm comes. Now the question turns to you. Not, do you want to be great? That is too easy, too borrowed from posters and speeches. What do you actually mean when you say you want greatness? Do you want to create something, or do you want to be admired? Do you want mastery, or do you want superiority? Do you want freedom, or do you want escape from the ordinary? Do you want to leave a legacy? Or are you terrified of being forgotten? Do you want to rise? Or are you simply running from the voice that whispers you are not enough? And the final descent. Do you want greatness because you have something to give the world? Or because you cannot bear the thought of leaving it without a trace? Because the tree does not negotiate with the soil. It does not ask the darkness to be gentle. It enters completely. It lets the pressure shape it. It lets the absence of light become part of its strength. And only then, only when the roots have touched what they were sent to touch, does the tree begin to rise. Not as an escape, but as the only direction left to grow. The great man is not the one who never descended. He is the one who descended, touched what he found there, and chose to rise anyway, carrying the darkness with him, not as a burden, but as the weight that makes him real. That is the only greatness worth wanting, not the greatness the world applauds, but the greatness of being entirely, unbearably, irreducibly yourself.